Welcome to Masters of Business, a show that gives you real-world techniques, cutting-edge strategies, and extraordinary insights for managers and leaders who want to develop the business acumen needed to go faster and farther in their business careers. Now, here's the master himself, Stephen Haines.
Hi, my name is Stephen Haines, and this is the first official recording for Masters of Business. Masters of Business is a podcast or a show that I have been thinking about for a really long time. So I'm going to use this first episode to talk about what I've been thinking about, to share some ideas, to evoke perhaps a response from you as a listener, or for people who you know may be potential listeners. So I figured the way I would go about doing this is to give you a little bit of a resume, because just starting a show, like a lot of people do because they have an idea, is one thing. This field is incredibly crowded. And so what I'm thinking about is how can I make something different that will appeal to a broad array of people who are interested in improving their capability as a business person, as a leader. And the area that I have chosen to focus on is business acumen. And I've started an entire new company to focus on that, but I'll put that aside. So I'm going to go back to my childhood. And when I was a little kid, and we weren't a family of means, and there was something about the things that were clicking inside of my head that were aspirational. I saw other kids have stuff, and I wanted stuff. But if we didn't have any money to get stuff, I figured I'd have to go find a way to get some money. And I found a whole host of things to do, whether it was painting fences or shoveling driveways, or just looking for odd jobs to do, because that was the only way that I figured I could hustle up a buck. And throughout my adolescent years, finding places to work, cutting grass or working in an ice cream store, or I worked in a stockbroker's office. I did a whole host of things, worked all the way through college. I knew when I was about 14 that I was going to get an MBA. I don't understand why, but I figured there was a path to corporate success to secure some of my financial future and things like that. But just because you have aspirations doesn't mean that things are easy. And I'm sure any one of you listening will understand more about the challenges that you've had, the challenges you see other people have, and so on. But I always had these two perspectives. One is the perspective of me being in me in the moment, and the me sort of looking from above. I know it sounds really weird, right? But observing myself, and sometimes being able to intervene, and sometimes not. So that sort of subconscious presence, always knew that there was sort of something else, and there was some guidance in that. But as I went through school, and I got a job after school, and I had a bunch of different jobs. I also, when I was in school, I figured I needed a trade. So my trade was corporate finance, and ended up having a few different jobs, both in the defense electronics firm, a medical products company, and things like that. And I ultimately ended up in a company called AT&T. And in that company, I was actually brought into their IT infrastructure, their data center business. Some of the challenges that they had were they had these departments that were making claims on computing resources, but they weren't necessarily paying their fair share. The way I would put it is they didn't understand the value they were getting, and so a lot of people were getting a bargain for a lot of stuff. And I was a young kid at the time, and my bosses said, "Could you figure out a way to normalize this?" And I became a student of the IT infrastructure. But in my earlier jobs as a financial analyst and so on, I learned how a company worked. When you're doing budgeting and forecasting and you're working with every operating department in the company and you're going one-on-one with all of the bosses or the leaders of each of these departments, you build a perspective on the world of how things fit together. And I have a little bit of a natural affinity toward the ability to connect the dots and to see how things operate and interoperate. And I want to go back to sort of this AT&T job in the data center business, because I took that experience that I had of understanding how people worked in different departments and what they did and how they did it. And I mapped out all the different functions, all the different operating departments that were using computing resources. And then I remapped the infrastructure that had to serve them and was able to come up with a way to recalibrate the infrastructure, as well as to provide value to the end user departments. And I came up with this idea of a for-profit nonprofit inside of a large corporation, which resonated really well with my bosses. And at that time, what they said to me was, well, we want you to move into product management. And I said, no, I really don't want to do that. And they said, well, yeah, we do want you to do that. And so when your executive directors are telling you to go be a product manager, you go learn how to be a product manager. And I did want to do international business. And I like the idea of owning something like a business or a product. And I went to a 5-day class and I was hooked, because when you're a product manager, you really are sort of a business owner. A product is a business inside of a business. And so therefore, doing that work allowed me to fine tune my craft as a business person and helped me to continue on my business journey. But the thing that used to bother me incredibly was how other people in different departments, how a person in IT or a person in marketing or a person in operations, nobody really understood what everybody else did and didn't necessarily have an appreciation for that. And that thing in the back of my head, whether it's a subconscious or looking at things, allowed me to begin stitching pieces together. And as I had been evolving in my career, this idea behind connecting the dots or seeing how things worked or looking at cause and effect became profoundly impactful to me in how I went about doing the work that I did on a day-to-day basis. And I try, I mean, listen, as I look back, I don't know that I was always like the best, most collaborative person. I had to learn a lot about people and people skills, and it's something that I continue to learn about. But I was passionate and I was committed and I was determined. I discovered resiliency. Not that I wasn't, but that it was an actual vocabulary word that I can apply to a business person. And as you go through your business career and as you develop as a leader, you start to see these things. Okay, you start to see behaviors. You start to see attributes of people and how people interact with one another. And I think in my world of product management, that became profound. And as I moved up in the world of product management and moved into a more progressive role in a different company called Oracle back in the .com era, because I can call it an era now. It was the Wild West. It was the Silicon Valley. It was you can do anything. It was from the conservatism of a major corporation like an AT&T at that time to a sort of a Wild West software company. I continued my learning journey, and I continued to apply my own mental benchmarks to things that worked and things that don't work. I want to backtrack for a second because I left something out, because when I did work at AT&T, I did work on a corporate task force. The task force was focused on product management excellence. And over a period of several years, there was a tremendous amount of anthropomorphic work that was done in benchmarking other companies. And the main idea was, how do you assess what a company does in terms of a practice or some method that equates to business and or product and or portfolio success. And those benchmarks and that process of benchmarking has served me quite well over the years. So as my Oracle career wound down, one of the things that I had learned was that product management didn't belong reporting to a development function, number one. It sort of needed its own home. And I didn't think it was going to be there. And so I decided to take a shot and become an entrepreneur myself. And I started a company called Sequent Learning, which focused on training product managers. And the thing about that venture, and boy, oh boy, was that a scary venture for me, for a person who's a fairly fiscal conservative, based on my background and upbringing and all that other stuff, was really bold, because I sometimes, this is going to be interesting, right? What you see as something rosy is really, really difficult. Like, one of my life lessons is, starting a business is a whole lot harder and takes a whole lot more effort than putting something in a business plan. And having a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go see the light of day if you don't know how to actually do it. And there is no book for it. I can write books all I want, but there isn't, the instruction manual for your brain, which is really where I want to go with this ultimately. So starting Sequent and working through it, and one of the things I realized in the earlier days of that company was that training classes don't fix companies. Executives help to fix companies, but you need a whole lot more to create an organization with a culture that is hospitable to ideas and innovation, and even sort of bucking the trend, while not living up to a shareholder expectation all the time, and circumventing some things so that you can be more innovative and be more competitive. But again, topics for other days. So as I've worked with Sequent over a couple of decades and continue to do so this day, probably a few years ago, one of the things that I had realized through the literally tens of thousands of people who've passed in front of me over the years in my courses had to do with integrative thinking. Some people can call it horizontal thinking, you can call it holistic thinking, you can use whatever word you want to see how things work and how things operate and interoperate. As a matter of fact, when I have done product management courses, or when I've worked with companies and their product teams and others, believe it or not, the way I see things is that people view their role in an organization from a vertical standpoint. People sometimes use the term silo or a functional silo. Again, the term doesn't expose the truth, which is that even though people believe they're operating on behalf of the whole, they tend to be operating on behalf of the job they have to do and the function from which they come, and the bosses whose judgments and who are being evaluated by senior executive teams are more on the performance of that department, not necessarily on the performance of a whole. In some companies, and listen, there are tremendous numbers of companies who do powerful jobs of creating hospitable cultures and innovative environments, and those are the benchmarks. Those are the kinds of companies we aspire to. But I go back to what is actually happening in the minds of people. I recall a time many years ago, I was interviewing a senior executive at one of the big banks in Canada, and he was talking about how the people who were going into some of the leadership roles, whether they be product or otherwise, had to be spotted like like talent spotters, or if you have a sports team, you have people who roam around and go to the lesser leagues, and they go to the colleges, and they're looking for talent, a certain type of talent. And I took that really seriously as I started to evaluate people who were in my workshops, who were attending and participating. And you can see where some people, where the gears are turning, and how they are putting things together. And it reminds me of myself sometimes, of how, the gears inside of my head are always spinning. Sometimes it just will not shut up. And there's a thirst for wanting to understand and to put things together, and to act on behalf of the organization in a most positive of ways, even when there are a lot of obstacles. And I started to really drill into this idea behind what was that thing. I didn't even understand the word, because the words were not coming to my lips, even though there is a term that does exist. And on another note, because I am wandering a bit, sometimes I look at some alerts, like a Google alert or something like that, and I look at what are some people doing, and why are some people getting promoted to new jobs, and they would always say, well, it's because of their business acumen. And when I started to look at that term and put it under a microscope, it became a little bit more clear to me. And then there was something else. I was doing an onboarding program for one of the banks in New York, and a person who had been training in the area of business acumen was literally training people, because he left his, or she left their material in my classroom. They were training people on financial acumen. Finance is not business. Finance is a part of business, just like product development is a part of product management. A development process isn't the business of the product. And people do get drawn to certain things because they believe that if they can latch on to something and there's something predictable or linear about it, then they can sort of follow the steps and become experts in that. And that's also not such a great thing to build business acumen. So I started to do some experimentation, and one of the outcomes was a book called The Business Acumen Handbook. And I started to think about, so what else am I going to do with that? What was my goal? I asked myself. Well, my goal was to help people think like business people, think like a general manager, think like a CEO, not be a CEO, not be a general manager per se, but to build the awareness and the cognizance and the experience and the skill set to develop business acumen. And by the way, just because you say the word and because you think you want to be doesn't necessarily mean you are, because you need a path. And when I think of a path, I think of a strategy. And a strategy is sort of built around this idea of, you've gone down a road, you're someplace now, you've got to figure out what you want to do. You have to envision what that future state might look like, and you have to build some steps to get there, and some goals you want to achieve. And even looking at goals and the steps, or goals and the plan, or whatever else you want to talk about your strategy, doesn't go in a straight line. And what I have discovered about strategic planning even is the fact that many people who are either vertically aligned or linear thinkers want to follow the path. Even if you look at corporate strategic planning processes, they're sort of linear. They start in June and they end in December. Somebody loads up your checkbook and boom, you're done. But strategic planning is a whole lot more dynamic. But if I pull myself back for a second and say, well, strategic planning it requires a strategic head, a strategic brain, a brain that, or a mindset, or a mental model of the world that you have now. So a model is a visualization, and a mental model or a visualization of some future state. And the wherewithal to understand all of the dynamics of your environment, both from the outside and from the inside, to figure out what are the most appropriate steps that will yield the most or the optimal results. Maybe not the best, but what's optimal. And I think of that when I think about business acumen. That business acumen is sort of this portfolio of skills and experiences and things like that that will help a person along their both career journey and to help a company in the achievement of its own strategic goals. And the meshing of those, the building together of those capabilities takes some time. And the way I have seen this and the way I am now envisioning how to both build this podcast, build this show, and to build what I see as a new community is to break the mold out of leadership development and all these great, and really, I don't mean to slight any of the other shows or broadcasts that are in the world about these things, because I think they are invaluable, but we don't have a lot of time. And I want to become more impactful by catalyzing thoughts. Now, I don't have a monopoly on creativity and on all of these thoughts. Sometimes they're fleeting, sometimes they hit me in different places, right? But other people do. And whether I have a thought or an idea to spark an idea or an action that will help a person take another step forward in building their business acumen, then perhaps I will have become more successful as well. And so what I want to try to do in this show is to help you to build the mindset, to build the mental models that will help you regardless of where you are, right? So if you think of each person, you are a strategic plan by yourself. You're all taking a different pathway. You've all come a certain number of steps. You all have various experiences, and now you want to fine-tune yourself to get ahead. Some of you are naturally inclined and easy studies. You have great mentors and things like that, and some of you don't. So there are a whole host and probably tens of thousands, if not millions of you who may benefit from listening to this. And what I really hope for is that you and I can speak together from time to time, whether I do this in monologue format, whether I do this with guests, because I do plan on having a number of guests, and maybe every couple of weeks or every month, we'll launch another cast and you can sort of learn from that. And then I will watch, I will take note of what's going on. And my antenna, my business acumen antenna, they're up. And I want to hear, and I want to learn. I want to learn from you. I want to impart some of the wisdom that I've gained throughout my career and how I am learning and growing along my career journey. So with that, I hope you will continue to listen, recommend, and join me on my journey as you become a master of business. I'm Stephen Haines, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Masters of Business with Stephen Haines, a podcast that captures the ideas and lessons learned from thinkers and leaders in business. If you'd like to take your company to the next level, consider the courses and books from the Business Acumen Institute. To learn more, go to business-acumen.com.